Hello, today we are going to talk about ecosystems. So we've talked about populations, we've talked about communities, and today we're going to get into ecosystems. So to help us understand ecosystems, ecosystems involve a lot of energy. So what we need to know about ecosystems is that energy is going to move in a one-way flow through communities within ecosystems. So what this means is that energy is going to enter an ecosystem and then it's going to leave an ecosystem. It's going to kind of go through. It's not going to recycle itself. We can't recycle energy. The energy to drive the activities of life comes from the sun, which is used and transformed in the chemical reactions of life. We already know about this, right? We know that plants take the energy from the sun and turn it into sugar. So that's an energy conversion. And then we eat that sugar. We can turn it into ATP. That's another energy conversion. Ultimately, all of the energy from the sun eventually is transferred to heat, and that heat radiates back into space. Nutrients, however, like nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, those nutrients constantly cycle and recycle within an ecosystem. So here we have a view of that, right? Here is the energy. We have energy coming from the sun. From the sun, the energy is transferred to plants. Notice that some of that energy is lost as heat. Then the energy from plants goes to herbivores, some lost as heat. The energy in the herbivores goes to the carnivores, some lost as heat again. And that's basically how energy goes through a system. Nutrients, however, stay within an ecosystem. For example, we need nitrogen and nitrates. And so that nitrogen is going to go into living things and it's going to return back to the soil, and it's just going to keep going throughout, recycling and cycling again and again throughout an ecosystem. So energy flows in and out. Nutrients can cycle. Here's an example of one nutrient, carbon. We already learned about the carbon cycle last semester, but basically there's carbon in the air. Plants take that carbon and fix it through photosynthesis. Animals can then eat the carbon that makes up the plant. Animals are going to undergo cell respiration and return the carbon to the air. So it's a very quick cycle from the air to plants to animals and then back to the air again. All right, so just a reminder of what level we are talking about. We are talking about ecosystems. An ecosystem is a group of communities and all the abiotic factors with them. So we're sort of in the middle. It's the biggest level that we are going to talk about. Ecosystems are a community of many organisms, or actually several communities, and the physical environment that they interact with. Ecosystems are the first level that's made of both biotic and abiotic factors. All right, here, once again, nutrients are continuously recycled. Notice the purple goes down and over and back up, but the solar energy goes in, all the energy goes in, and then it goes out. Here's a view of photosynthesis, so an important cycle. Carbon goes into the plant, energy comes from the sun. Both of these things connect with water, and they release oxygen, and then the plants make sugar, which we can then eat. So when we talk about energy in an ecosystem, there are two terms that you need to know. The first term is autotroph. Autotrophs are sometimes called producers. These are both terms that you should know. And these things both describe plants or other photosynthetic organisms. Autotrophs and producers make their own food from the environment. Meanwhile, heterotrophs, a heterotroph or a consumer, that's another word for the same thing, like an animal, these consume their food, right? Like us, we cannot make our own food by sitting out in the sun. We have to eat our food. We have to eat other organisms, whether they are plants or animals. Another term is net primary productivity. Now, you may not have heard this term before, but it's pretty simple. Basically, net primary productivity means the energy that photosynthetic organisms store and make available to the community over time. So net primary productivity shows how an autotroph and heterotrophs are connected, right? Autotrophs make all of the energy, and heterotrophs are dependent on them. So net primary productivity is how much energy the autotrophs in an ecosystem can make, and it determines how much life an ecosystem can support. So on this map, the darker green areas are the more productive areas. There's a higher net primary productivity, which means more life can be supported. Right? And if you take a look at where it's the greenest, it's all areas that are rainforest areas, very warm, very sunny, lots of plants can grow, and therefore lots of animals can be supported. Here in South America and Central America, in Central Africa, in Southeast Asia, all of these places are very green. There's lots of light, there's lots of water, there's warm temperatures, so many plants grow, and if many plants can grow, that's a high net primary productivity, which means that lots of animals can exist there because they're eating the plants. Energy is going to flow through what we refer to as trophic levels. Trophic refers to energy, so you can think of this as feeding levels in a community. The producers are always on the bottom. Every single ecosystem begins with producers. The things that feed on producers are called primary consumers. Primary consumers are usually herbivores. Herbivores means they eat plants. Those that feed on primary consumers are called carnivores because they eat other animals. And these are also referred to as secondary consumers. Some carnivores eat other carnivores, and that's something that happens. And these are tertiary or third level consumers. Some animals are omnivores, and they can be herbivores, they can be carnivores. Sometimes they are primary, secondary, and occasionally tertiary consumers, depending on the situation. So what does that look like? So at the bottom of the pyramid, we have producers. Producers are plants, green things. And then we have the herbivores. We have the primary consumers. This is the second trophic level. All right. And then we have the things that eat the primary consumers. We have the third trophic level. So notice it's the third trophic level, but these are secondary consumers. And then we have the fourth trophic level, or the tertiary consumers. And then we have the top, the fifth trophic level, or the quaternary consumers. The quaternary consumers is hawk, eats the tertiary consumers, which will eat the secondary consumers, which will eat the primary consumers, which eats the plants. So a food chain is going to be a linear feeding relationship with just one representative at each trophic level. So we start with the producer. The producer is always a plant or maybe algae if we're talking about the water. Then we have a primary consumer. That would be the caterpillar. Second trophic level with primary consumer because it's the first consumer. Then we have the secondary consumer, this bird that is eating the caterpillar. That's the third trophic level. And then the fourth trophic level is the tertiary consumer, the hawk, that eats the bird, that eats the caterpillar, that eats the plant. Here we have a marine food chain. Phytoplankton are the producer. They're sort of like microorganisms that photosynthesize. Zooplankton then eat them. And then little fish eat the zooplankton. And then a larger here, a shark, is going to eat these fish. A food web is going to show many food chains kind of weaved into one thing. It's showing the actual feeding relationships of the community because clearly animals eat more than one thing. So this is a bit more realistic. So in this food web, for example, if we look at something like the rabbit. So the rabbit is right here in the middle. I'll use my laser pointer right there. The rabbit is a primary consumer or an herbivore because it is eating the grass. However, some animals can belong to different trophic levels, right? So we can have this large bird towards the top. This large bird is going to eat a few different things. It can be a secondary consumer by eating the mouse that eats the plants, or it can be a tertiary consumer by eating some other things. So different animals can be at different trophic levels. Decomposers then are what's going to break down all the dead and decaying matter. So we often forget these in a food chain or a food web, but they are important because they break down organic matter. Worms, protists, bugs, centipedes, worms, fungi, bacteria, vultures, all of these things break down stuff that is rotting away. So they are part of the food chain that we often forget. Decomposers return or recycle nutrients back into the soil so that plants can take them up and they can start again. Decomposers cannot return energy. Although decomposers get energy from eating, they don't return energy to the soil. That doesn't happen. The energy transfer through all these different trophic levels is going to be inefficient. Only a small percentage is actually going to transfer. So the reason why is because every time we have an energy transfer, we're losing energy as heat. We also lose some energy because it may be used for maintenance, repair, and movement. And some organisms are going to die without being eaten. So their energy is not going to be transferred on to the next trophic level. So here we show that happening. We have the sun giving energy to the producer, and the producer is losing lots of energy as heat. All right, so the producer gets eaten by the primary consumer, the squirrel, but it's not totally efficient, right? Because the squirrel is also losing energy as heat, and we're losing energy at the secondary consumer level. Some leaves and some animals die without being eaten. And because of these reasons, the energy transfer is not totally efficient. So to show how energy transfer is not efficient, we have energy pyramids. Energy pyramids illustrate energy transfer between trophic levels. We've got the producers at the bottom, and the trophic levels get stacked on top of one another. Basically, the net energy transfer between trophic levels is about 10%. Only 10% of the available energy is passed on to the next level. So we see that here. If there are 1,000 calories of plants, then only 10% of that is going to make it to the primary consumer level. So notice that's only 100 calories making it from those plants to the grasshoppers. And then if the grasshoppers then have 100 calories, only 10% of that makes it to the secondary consumer level, or the tertiary, the third trophic level. And from then, only 10% makes it to the tertiary consumer. So it's really a surprisingly small amount of energy that makes it up from one trophic level to the next. And that's because these energy transfers are inefficient. There is a loss due to heat. Some stuff can't be used, can't be eaten, can't be digested. Sometimes organisms die without being eaten. And then some energy is just used for growth and living. And for all of those reasons, that's why there's such a small percentage that makes it to the next level. So these energy pyramids are important to understand because they have some ramifications. Notably, plants dominate most communities. And I mean, if you think about it, like there has to be the most of plants because animals eat the plants. If there were more animals than plants, what would happen? The animals would run out of food because the plants would all die. So plants have to dominate most communities because they have the most energy available to them. And then herbivores, and then carnivores. So there's mostly plants, a few herbivores, and very few carnivores. Carnivores have the least energy available to them. This is also why we could actually feed more people directly on grain than on meat. And that's because in order to eat meat, we're eating an animal that eats a plant. So that's a very inefficient transfer of energy. But going directly to the plant level and producer level is more efficient. All right. And so that is where we're going to stop. If you have any questions, let me know.